Nurses, doctors or first responders, what's the most horrific 4th of July incident you dealt with? Not horrific, but last year the city of Salt Lake in Utah responded to 400 plus calls just related to firework incidents. A drunk man in a gorilla costume on a jet ski crashed into the lake dock one time and I had to kick him off the beach. And another time I had to break up a few Kiwis fighting over volleyball, but somehow I don't have any crazy devastating incidents I ever had to deal with on the 4th of July, just stopping people from doing dumb things. Responded to a call in a Walmart. Some kid lit a firework into their display of fireworks and started an industrial fire. Took 6 hours to put out. Kid got juvie time. There was a video floating around a couple years ago of someone doing this. Helped with this one as an intern a while ago. Some drunk guy was holding a mortar tube and firing it off. Ended up turning towards him, so he put his hand over the tube to hopefully stop it coming out. Ended up blowing up the majority of his hand and burned a hole in his abdomen. Hand we took back for multiple surgeries, including one to basically sew his hand to his groin to heal for a while. Abdomen was super lucky and just burned a hole through the skin, muscles and such. Didn't involve any intestines at all. Geez, lots of mortar incidents. Those things are truly no joke to mess around with. I had a 9-year-old lose an eye a few years ago. An older kid shot a bottle rocket at him and the bottle rocket hit him in the right eye. The globe ruptured from the explosion. I had to pack his eye socket with gauze in an attempt to keep the rest of the globe together, but it was pretty obvious the eye was a total loss. The older kid was prosecuted for the incident. That's brutal. Poor kid too. Little boy fell off his uncle's pontoon boat and drowned during their family's big 4th of July family get together at a lake. He was wearing a life jacket, but the propellers snagged it and held him underwater. The father beat up the uncle in the IQ waiting room when the news was broken. It was complete chaos. I was a kid at the time, first responder now. Friend of the family was a spectator at a city event. A firework misfired and went into the crowd and hit him square in the face before blowing up. It broke most of the bones in his face, lost one eye, suffered brain damage. Holy crap. Tech here. I had a patient who thought it would be funny to light their farts with a lighter when they were drunk. Their perineal area was scorched. Please drink responsibly and be careful with flammable objects. Perineal area. That's just a fancy word for the gooch, ain't it? My dad's got a good 4th of July maiming story. He was 11 years old up in Port Jervis, NY, running around, slipped, fell, and sliced his ear off on the side of an oven. He goes to the emergency room, and he sits between 2 guys, both drunk off their heads, one guy who has blown his hand clean apart, and another who put an M8 in his mouth. Both are telling him to never play with fireworks. Needless to say, my father was not fond of us playing with fireworks. Well, I imagine one of the guys told him not to play with fireworks, the other just making unintelligible noises. 2 years ago, patient came in with only thumb and pointer finger remaining on right hand. Of course, there was alcohol involved. I'm sure not the most horrific, but it was definitely a showstopper. Actual words being slurred from patient, staring down at the mess. Well crap. Deep sigh, this is gonna hurt in the morning. 2. I have a good one. So, I'm going to my cousin's lake house for the weekend. He picked me up at the airport. We're literally pulling into the trail leading to his property when his pager goes off. He looks at it and bites his lip. It goes off again, and he says, I got a call. I'm going to have to drop you and go. Not wanting to be alone in a house with his wife. Nice lady, but so talkative and high energy. She's excruciatingly awkward. I ask if I could go with him to see what the excitement is. He hesitates and finally agrees. We go maybe 5 minutes away and there's a single cop car, and my cousin beat the emergency truck. I look off to the side to see an older lady yelling at some guy, and the guy is sitting, hunched over looking like he's sad about something. My cousin gets out with his kit, and is putting on gloves as he heads over. The cop is looking like she's trying not to laugh. What seems like an eternity later, after 4 calls every 10 minutes from my cousin's wife asking where we are, my cousin comes back just as it looks like they're putting the older guy on a stretcher, but I can't really see. Cousin gets in and tells me wait till we get up the road and he'll fill me in, and the whole time he's trying not to laugh. So, older guy is sitting out behind his house planning on having a few drinks, shooting tannerite, and maybe smoke a few cigars. He sets the stuff up, and a coyote comes to the edge of the wooded area, and the guy gets the bright idea of putting some raw venison on one of the stumps he set up and blowing up the coyote when he starts munching on it. The coyote is spooked enough by the guy it goes back into the woods. Guy waits and drinks, and his wife tells him to either call it a night or put the guns away. Guy starts walking down to clean up his stuff when he sees a coyote has snuck up through the grass, and he quickly fires a shot at the stump. Big boom, coyote runs off, and the folding knife he had used to cut the venison. The folding knife he had forgotten he set down on the stump, had kicked back and nailed him right in the groin. The knife was closed, thankfully, but it still gave him quite the injury, and I guess while my cousin was helping him out, his wife was chewing him out, making an already embarrassing situation worse. This is super tragic and sad to bring up, but maybe some knucklehead will read this and be spared. Knew a kid who took a construction helmet and taped a large firework to the top for laughs. It quickly burned through the helmet, then scalp, then skull, then brain in the matter of 60 seconds. Didn't make it to the hospital. Taped a large firework to the top for laughs. I sure hope you guys at least laughed at him. There'd be nothing worse than dying trying to get a laugh and not getting one. So this has nothing to do with fireworks, but I had to treat a priapism on the 4th of July when on my emergency medicine rotation in medical school, currently a resident. A priapism is when you have an erection that will not subside on its own after 4 hours. I'll never forget the look on that patient's face as I held his erect penis in one hand and then stuck a needle in it. Not EMT, but I once saw drunk guys light fireworks off next to a group of people where there was a freaking baby. The box tipped over and started firing at the baby. So grabbed said baby and took off covering its ears and face, and then screamed at these two jackoffs who then had serious burns trying to pick the box back up. Not even my baby. My friend's dad is the person who flies the EMT helicopter, and he got a call on the 4th of July about a guy blowing up his face. Sure enough, this one dude lit a large Roman candle, and when it didn't fire right away, stared down the tube of the firework. The fireworks bursted through his eye and exploded in his skull. I believe the guy survived but now doesn't have half his face. And then I took on the name of my alter ego, forced to wear it forevermore. I became the Red Skull. I have no personal stories, oddly enough, but I did work with a dude who was an Iraq II veteran, who only had 4 fingers on one hand. He loved to scare kids around fireworks season by telling them he lost his finger in a firecracker incident. Edited to add, he lost it when he got caught in an IED detonation. Sorry if that was unclear. Technically just a very large firework. Not a doctor, but a guy I grew up with was filling shell casings with powder from emptied out fireworks. One blew up in his hand. When it was healed, his hand had weird lumps and skin texture. It resembled ET's hand but pink. Someone lit off fireworks close to my mother on 4th of July, and I guess she thought she was on fire. So she took her pants off and attempting the rest of her clothes until my brother stopped her and reassured her she was not on fire. Oh mom. Work in a hospital. We have a burn unit. Every year there's a bunch of fireworks and grill and kitchen fire accidents coming in with something that could have been avoided if the people involved had just taken a few moments to realize what could go wrong with this idea. A recurrent one is someone setting off a small firework in their hand. Hand open, little damage. Closed hand around the firework, yeah, anywhere from a few fingers to the majority of the hand now gone. I had just started working in the ER at my local hospital when we got a call for a young female with facial lacerations and severe burns to her face and hands. Upon arriving at the ER, she was rushed to my bay and I couldn't believe my eyes. Her face looked like someone put it through a meat grinder. Parts of her cheek and nose were missing. Her left eye was obliterated, missing teeth, and her tongue was split in two. The poor girl's hands had 3rd-degree burns all over them. Found out after we stabilized her that a mortar shell had knocked over its tube and shot her right in the face. She tried to block it with her hands and it exploded. The girl lived but had to endure multiple surgeries. I haven't been around fireworks since then. Poor deaf kid was bullied, pranked by neighborhood kids and given a firecracker. Firecracker went off and the kid lost his sight in both eyes. Made me so angry I wanted to find those other kids and make them blind and deaf. RN and EMT here. Ran out of beer. Oh god, this is the saddest story in here. A firework up someone's ass. I didn't get hit but everything else did. We bought one of those giant $200 firework barrages from Phantom Fireworks and we put it on uneven ground. The first shot flipped it on its side. A couple of windows blew out, our pool got some holes in it, and of course, my father lost some fingers after he accidentally caught one. The pointer and the ring finger, but they were reattached. Volunteer firefighter here. We were on our way back from our town's parade and got a call for a motorcycle accident. The guy had his kickstand through his bicep. We ended up removing the bike from the kickstand and that's the way the ambulance took him to the hospital. I wasn't any of these, but it's still pretty freaking horrifying. On the 4th of July, I was in the emergency room when this happened a couple years ago. I was sitting in the waiting room, and then a kid was on a stretched. I got a full glimpse of her, completely covered in burns, her hair singed, blood and pus oozing all over the remainder of her clothes. I have no idea what happened to her, but I hope she's okay. One of my friends blew off his hand one year. The idiot dumped powder from a bunch of firecrackers into a metal pipe, then proceeded to use a metal hammer to insert the metal cap to close it up for one big firecracker. Well, one thing set off a spark and the whole thing blew up in his hand. What happens on the 4th of July? Is it the declaration thing? Sorry, I'm not from the US. For the record, since OP didn't explain, the 4th of July is a holiday which celebrates our independence and such, but is also more pertinently to this story a holiday where dang near everybody gets blackout drunk and then plays with fireworks. Hence, it's the most fun goddamned holiday of the year. Kid lit the fuse to his shoot in the air and explode firework. He lit it, stepped back, and looked up. The firework malfunctioned and did not launch fully into the air. According to family, it only went up less than halfway and began falling back down before the big explosion. The firework then exploded inches away from this 15-year-old kid's face. He had a full thickness laceration to the eyelid. He wasn't able to open his eye, and when we pulled it open in the air and shined a light in there, he wasn't able to see anything, including the bright light. We transferred him out because he had a serious freaking problem and we had a trauma center with an ophthalmologist on call. My kids won't ever launch their own fireworks or even have sparklers. Every year at least 3 people come in with full thickness burns to their hands and fingers from the stupid torches that we hand to kids. Last year someone thought it was a good idea to set off fireworks on a sailboat 5 miles offshore. Needless to say, the boat caught on fire, like a lot of fire, and there was no lifeboat, and only 3 life jackets, which works out pretty well when there are 13 people on board. And they were all drinking or drunk. They lived, but that was an interesting one. Gallbladders everywhere. We're missing some deets there, Captain. Not a doctor, but it happened to me. I was 5 years old and it was the 4th of July. I slipped on the edge of the bath and fractured my wrist. I have never broken a bone or damaged a bone since then. I remember being in terrible pain after the fall and my parents took me to the hospital. The worst pain was seeing all the people being rushed into the ER because of freak accidents because of the 4th of July. It scarred me as a child seeing people on the brink of death because a firework blew up in their face. Firefighters of Reddit, what's the dumbest person you had to save in a stupid situation? Dumbass tried to cross a raging river in 0-degree weather about a 300-foot span on a snowmobile. He lived but didn't make the crossing and the machine was recovered days later. In Maine you are required to get your snowmobile out if you sink it in a lake. They don't want those things leaking and polluting. So every year you hear about some guy having to hire a diver and such. I once had a firefighter tell me he almost died in a house fire while going back into the house to look for the owner. A neighbor was concerned about why the firefighter was still in the residence, so he asked another firefighter. This is about how the exchange went. Neighbor: why is that fireman still in the house? Firefighter: he's looking for the owner of the home. Neighbor: he is right over there with the video camera. Turns out the owner did not think it was important to alert the fire department he was out of the house. Instead, he was just taking video of the whole event. The fire started because the owner had tried to smother his barbecue cooker flame with leftover wood from the siding that had been installed on his home. The owner did not realize it would burned his whole house down. Holy frick, people are stupid. I'm not a firefighter, but I used to do a lot of disaster response work. Hurricane Floyd, Eastern NC. I had a farmer with a large family that refused to evacuate his house. Stubborn bastard. River had broke loose. Floodwaters were coming up fast, and the police had given up on changing his mind. I drove my truck right up into his yard, rolled down the window and asked him to dress his kids in something orange or bright yellow. He asked me why and I said so body recovery will be able to distinguish them from all the dead pigs floating around. He told me to frick off, but 5 minutes later he had the whole family in the vehicle and they got the heck out. The local news station was just reminiscing on how much Floyd had fricked up Eastern Carolina. Glad those guys didn't end up as statistics. We needed to close the main connection through a forest over the winter because the trees were falling faster on the road than we could remove them due to way too much snow falling. Also, the redirection was more than an hour longer due to the snow. Some cars thought that they would come through but turned around as soon as they saw the trees on the road. One semi also thought he'd get through. He drove up to the trees and called the fire brigade and complained why we didn't remove the trees. As he was calling, a bunch of trees behind him also fell, locking him in. It stood there 1 month before the trees and the snow could get removed by us that at least the semi can back out. We needed another month until the road was free again. Former firefighter EMT. Easily the dumbest person I encountered was a mother of 4 who decided it would be an awesome idea to get a Facebook Instagram worthy picture of her kids, all under age 10, sitting in a rowboat. Mother untied it from the dock and thought she'd just pull them back with the rope that she forgot to hold on to. They floated a half-mile down the river before the 2 oldest boys managed to grab a branch hanging over the bank. It was really surreal to see 4 young kids, all in matching clothing, sitting in a boat waiting to be rescued. I have no clue what happened after, but they were physically fine, just scared, a little tired, but the mom was in full-blown panic mode and kept getting in our way. I hope she's making better choices now. Years ago we had this call straight out of Caddyshack. Some guy had gotten tired of this gopher ruining his yard. Little did he know though he was facing the Sun Tzu of gophers. The homeowner, dwelling upon his experience from Vietnam, decided that the best way to deal with the gopher was to treat the situation like a VC tunnel. In lieu of a frag grenade, he poured a 5-gallon can of gasoline down the gopher hole, waited with a varmint gun, and lit it off. The ensuing explosion caused a small crater to form in his yard. I am still thoroughly impressed that there was a proper fuel-to-air ratio in the network of tunnels that allowed for such an explosion to happen. However, the gopher refused to surrender without a fight. The gopher ran out of the hole engulfed in flames, causing the guy's yard to catch on fire. The gopher sprinted into the guy's shed still on fire and burrowed into a void space in the wall, where he died. Like the martyr perk from Modern Warfare, his still flaming remains set the inside of the wall on fire as well as several flammables. In the end, the guy's backyard was ruined and about a quarter of his shed burned down, taking out a bunch of power tools and a 0-turn mower. He definitely would have saved a few $1,000s if he had hired an exterminator. This reminds me of my dad. He hated fire ants. Always had gasoline around to clean the grease, you know. Well, he would get bit by an ant and the fight was on. Gasoline fetched and poured onto the mound, promptly lit, and the ensuing commentary delivered. Deepen. I'll show them ants fire. I'm not a firefighter, but my brother's wife at the time was. There was this massive structure fire at a barn in town that drew out nearly every truck in the general area, like 3 towns worth of firefighters trying to get this thing under control. During all of this, there was some lady who continuously called 911, asking over and over again what's going on at the farm up the road. According to her, this woman would have to be a complete moron to not realize what was going on, as the fire could be seen for miles. Fast forward later into the night and one of the ambulances on scene suddenly leaves. Obviously not normal for this sort of situation, but there isn't much time to question it. Fast forward still, and as things are finally starting to calm down and are under control, one of the volunteers on the original ambulance comes over in his own car and shuffles sheepishly over to her and the chief of their department. He tells them that there is a woman a little ways down the road who called the ambulance, hence why they left, and requires a lift assist, but absolutely refuses to let the EMTs do it. No, it has to be a firefighter. My brother's wife, seeing that the other departments have things under control, goes with the man to see what's up. Apparently, it was the same woman who had called 911 over and over again, and when they arrive, she is laying on the floor absolutely wailing. EMTs say they can't find anything wrong from what they've been able to do, but with her requested firefighter they are finally able to get this woman up. They start asking her what happened, hoping she might be more willing to share with my brother's wife there, and she says, "I was just feeling a little ignored. I figured this would get your attention." Grown woman just laid herself on the floor, called for help, insisted on a firefighter when there was no need, all because the barn fire was getting way more attention than she was, and the 911 operators wouldn't give her the gossip about what was going on. I know she got in major trouble for abusing 911, but from what I hear from the people on both fire and ambulance, she has made a habit of calling for help whenever she feels she's not getting enough attention. She sounds like the type of woman who would fake a seizure in public. Actually, no, she sounds like the type of woman who would fake a seizure in public because someone else was in the process of actually seizing and she was jealous of the attention. 2 I can recall, one specific. The specific one was a young girl around teenage years who decided those toddler swings with the seat you stick their legs through like a little basket so they can't fall out was made for a teenage girl. She got stuck and lost blood flow to her legs. We had to cut her down and get her to a hospital to have it safely removed due to it basically becoming a tourniquet on both her legs. The other is general, but it's people who didn't wear a seatbelt and the people they killed as a result. You have less control of a vehicle when you're not being held in place, so those wrecks are more common. As the first sign of trouble, your butt moves in the seat and reduces your ability to control the vehicle. You also become a projectile. If you're lucky, you only kill yourself. If you're not, you wind up bouncing around and killing a passenger. Also the leading cause of partial ejections and re-entry to vehicles, since nothing was holding them to the seats. So many times I could have just been there cutting someone out of a seat and them being barely beat up, but instead they had been scalped and died, or hit their kid or spouse or other family member or friend and killed them. One in particular I remember was a large man not wearing a seatbelt in an overturned truck. He woke up while we were working on him, cutting the passenger side up to get down to him as the vehicle was on its side, driver side down. He kept asking us how his son was. At first we didn't get it. Then we realized he was laying on his 15-16-year-old son, and due to the man's size we didn't see him. The son was wearing a seatbelt, but he died because his father smashed into him and smothered him to death while we worked, rather than just wear a seatbelt extender so his seatbelt fit. Also, don't lie to us about if you wore it. Your seatbelt won't fire the pretensioners if they are not engaged in the slot. They are designed that way. There is a circuit that is completed by the best being clicked in place, which is also how your car knows your passengers are wearing a seatbelt or not and sets off that obnoxious alarm. There is also a sensor in the passenger front seat of most modern vehicles to detect the weight of a small person, which is why your sodas or pizzas or whatever set off the alarm. Just wear the dang seatbelt and don't lie. If you were wearing it, I won't be able to pull tons of slack on it when I arrive. Guess what goes in the report as the determining factor your insurance sees as to if you should have your medical covered as a result of an accident? Yup, I don't know what they do with the information, but I have to write it in the report. Source: State Vehicle Rescue Technician and Firefighter. Mostly volunteer at this point. There was a horrifying but effective seatbelt advert when I was a kid. 90s England that basically went, "Today Joe killed his mum," then sat back down, with the kid sitting in the back and belted and smashing into the driver's seat. It turned me into one of those kids who would nag everyone about their seatbelts, but I've been in a couple of crashes since and walked away. It wasn't really his fault, but we had an old guy in a nursing home get his balls stuck in a shower chair. A motorist had a bad alternator and the car died while he was driving. The electric lock control stopped working. We were dispatched for a person trapped in a motor vehicle. On arrival, the advice was given to manually lift the lock knob. You can easily tell the ones who will not survive the first 24 hours of the zombie apocalypse. Firefighter paramedic in suburb of PHX had to transport a guy to the ER because he was constipated. His wife tried to dig it out with a wooden spoon. Spoon got stuck and hurt to move it. Walked in and there's a 250-pound man, butt naked, lying on his side with a huge wooden spoon stuck halfway up his butt. That is not why he had a spoon up his butt. Me and my dad are both firefighters, and he said one time they went to a house because an elderly man could not get out of the leather recliner because he had been sitting in it for a week straight, and his wife would just serve him drinks, food, and the guy never got up. He would just get drunk and defecate himself until he was physically stuck to the chair and they had to cut him out. 2 bikini-clad girls had to be rescued from a swift-moving river in a canoe. Neither girl brought a life vest or a paddle. Something crap creek. Had a drunk guy in Antarctica chase a penguin. Penguin stuck his beak through the offending drunk guy's calf. He got sent home, and a report on international treaty breach wound up on some Congress member's desk. Oh McMurdo, how I miss thee. Wow, penguins are powerful. Dude picked up a metal ring from a hardware store in lieu of paying for an actual dong ring. It got stuck. He went to the hospital. The hospital called the fire department because a Dremel tool turned out to be the right tool for the job. You guys sure Dremel near the bait and tackle a lot. I use mine for small wood projects. Just ask this question of a firefighter friend. He saved a guy who was siphoning gas out of someone's car by sucking gas towards his mouth to start the siphon. The would-be thief was also smoking while doing it. Burns happened. Had a fellow who was running from the police. He decided to climb on board a chunk of ice that was flowing down the river. I am sure he thought he was a genius at the time, but the issue is that there isn't really a whole lot north of our town for a few hundred miles, so his long-term planning wasn't great. Eventually we found him hiding in a small icy overhang on the side of the river suffering from hypothermia. After a brief stay in hospital he ended up being arrested. I was a volunteer firefighter many years back. One summer, after a long period of no rain, 2 good old boys decide to have a few dozen beers and take their Jeep into a nearby field to go off-roading. Well, 2 featuring tall corn stalks that are bone dry wind up getting jammed up into the undercarriage, which, on a 90+ degree day, turns out to be hot enough to ignite a fire. The owner of the field sees the situation unfolding from their house and calls for fire and police. Given the proximity to my location, I go directly to the scene after hearing the page go out and see these 2 buttholes trying to drive the Jeep faster and faster to put the fire out. Eventually, the engine gives out, but they won't leave the car. I physically had to reach in, burning my arms in the process, since I didn't respond to the station first to get my turnout gear, and pull them out. Somehow, they decided that remaining in the car would slow down the flames, and because they thought it was a good idea to continue driving a burning vehicle around a dry field, we now have a significant brush fire and have to call mutual aid from another county to help douse the fire. State police get involved, I have a nice trip to the hospital, and buttholes lose their Jeep and the remainder of their booze. Former fire and rescue firefighter here. Have helped release several dogs and children stuck in the mechanism part of a recliner chair. Also a bird stuck in a tree. Go figure. I remember asking a firefighter about this once, and he said a guy who was fricking a woman. Her husband came home, so he jumped out the 2nd-story window buck naked and impaled himself through the upper leg on a fence paling. It was one of those fleur-de-lis ones, so it fricked up his leg pretty badly. They had to cut the paling out of the fence and load him into an ambulance. I honestly thought this story would end with someone getting their dangler stuck in something, but that's worse. That's much worse. Obligatory, not a fireman, but they were most definitely involved. I used to work in a Nick public grammar school over the summers to pay for college back in the 90s. One of the full-time employees was a nice guy but stupid. And I don't mean he was slow or anything. He just did dumb crap because he was careless. One time he loaded up a trailer with like 25 gallons of gas and was driving it back through the main school parking lot. He didn't realize that container cracked open and spilled all 25 gallons in the parking lot. He didn't want to get in trouble, so he thought the best way to get rid of the evidence was to set the gas on fire. He didn't realize that burning gas gives off a lot of black smoke, and a gigantic cloud of black smoke coming from a school generally attracts a lot of attention from first responders. Panicking, He tries to put the flaming lake of gas out by driving over it with his car. The fire department gets there, screaming at him to stop driving his car through flaming gasoline. They finally get the fire out and just screamed at this guy for like 25 minutes. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. I was the dumb call. My cat got her paw stuck under the dishwasher and was screaming bloody murder. I couldn't move her paw and I couldn't lift the machine. So I sat with her while my husband called the fire department. She chewed right through one of my favorite blankets in her stress. Firefighters arrive, not in full suits but heavy boots and pants. Soon as they came around the corner to the kitchen, our cat miraculously was able to free her paw and take off to hide in the bathroom. The guys seemed confused, but at least it was easy. We thanked them profusely for being scary enough to free our cat, who had zero physical damage, not even a broken claw. I guess she'd hooked her claws on something and didn't want to let it go for love or money. Not me, but dad was a firefighter in Nick and once responded to a call at a Chinese food restaurant where the owner's walkway was iced over. He apparently didn't speak very good English and maybe misunderstood the job of a fireman. Genuinely don't know. They salted down his front walkway for him and explained that this was 100% not their job. They all had a good laugh and the guy gave them all free egg rolls. PPL always used to ask him questions about crazy calls and he never enjoyed talking about that, so he would always tell that story. Happened in 1999, still makes me laugh to this day 20 years later. ETA, if you plan on commenting something along the lines of 20 years ago, ZOMG, I'm old. Screw you for reminding me. I assure you roughly 40 other people have already beaten you to the punch. I get it. 99 doesn't feel that long ago. Let's all move on, lol. It's interesting that that's what so many people took away from this story. Heard this story from a friend. Emergency call comes in for a miscellaneous electrical hazard. Chief walks in and a woman tells him that the TV in the bedroom is making a weird noise. It's turned off but there's a low buzzing sound coming from the area. Chief unplugs the TV, which she didn't think to do, and the noise doesn't stop. The TV is sitting on top of a chest of drawers, so he opens up the top drawer and finds this woman's celeb just buzzing away. Super awkward. Obligatory, not a firefighter, but recently in San Diego a group of suburban moms decided to take their infants up the local hiking spot called Cowles Mountain. It's not a particularly grueling hike as many children and elderly people can do it. However, there is a heat stroke warning posted at the trailhead. Not to mention it can get pretty hot here, and this last week was no exception with temperatures exceeding 90 degrees. Well, these idiots took their infants up in this heat. The trail is pretty exposed and due to its easy accessibility and Instagram worthiness, lots of inexperienced hikers flocked to it, many times with little to no water because they underestimated how hot and difficult it could be. Needless to say, the fire department EMS and chopper were all called as these moms had taken their babies up and were too tired and exhausted to come down. They had to go up and give water, check their conditions, and some even carried the babies down. I know fires are a lot hotter, but I bet they were cursing out these moms in their heads as they had to hike up the mountain in pretty much full gear. The moms came strolling down laughing and flipping off the cameras as they were angry people were going to see their stupidity. This happened all because they wanted to take a group photo with their infants on a mountain on a hot day. I was on a backpacking trip through some national parks a couple years ago and we were repeatedly shocked by how little water most people were carrying. Like you're in the middle of the fricking desert and we'd see people with no pack just holding a 20-ounce bottle of water. Meanwhile, I've got 3L in my pack and an extra 750 milliliters bottle just in case. Fire department and the paramedics had to come to my work one day because some kid didn't know the difference between a swimming pool and a splash pad. There's this artificial waterfall that goes down into a basin that's only about 2 inches deep where there's fountains and stuff for kids to play in. This kid decided to climb up the waterfall. There are multiple signs posted not to do this, and decided to dive off into the water below that again is only 2 inches deep. Luckily the kid landed flat on his face, so he survived and avoided being paralyzed, but he was knocked out cold immediately and would have probably drowned, but luckily his mother heard the splat and came running over screaming and pulled him out. And for my next trick, I shall dive from the roof onto this damp sponge. Not a firefighter. This happened to my son when he was 6. He was at a Cub Scout meeting which was next door to the fire station. The firefighters had these racks where they'd lay their hoses out to dry, I think. The little scouts were climbing on those racks one day and my son's chubby leg slipped between the bars and got stuck. The firefighters had to come use the jaws of life on their own dang racks to free my kid. Paramedics, firefighters, cops. What is the weirdest thing you've come across during a call? I'm a volunteer firefighter in South Texas, and one of my weirdest calls has to be something that happened just a few months ago. We receive a page saying the local naval air station has a plane down, requesting tanker and manpower assistance. We respond with about 6 guys in our tanker and our command truck. We get to the NAS, drive out to the brush behind the runways, and see 2 small grass fires as well as some smoldering wreckage of a naval T-45 trainer. We're told to stay by our trucks until the wreckage is cleared by the NAS firefighters, so we just stand around, bullshitting. My lieutenant and I are standing there when we see one of the naval firefighters hauling butt around the front of our truck, yelling climb up. Get off the ground. We don't question the guy and almost vault on top of our truck. I look over the side, not knowing what to expect, and see a freaking wild pig running towards the truck. She hits the side, bounces back a little, snorts, and runs off into the brush, where we now notice a pack of piglets coming around her, then following deeper in. Then we look at the NAS guy, and he just shrugs, says I don't know what set her off, but she charged me. Then he just got back down and went about his business, while we stand there, looking at each other, laughing our asses off. No time to explain. Working a shift with an ambulance crew. I'm not an EMT, was there for a company building a product to help EMTs and dispatchers to communicate. Went to a call about intense abdominal pains. Get to the apartment. Knock. We can hear the guy yelling from deep in the apartment, saying busted down, so the EMTs did break it open. We go in, find a guy, fully clothed, lying on his bed in a fetal position moaning. The EMTs start taking his vitals. He's breathing. Pulse is fast, but strong. Temperature is a little up, but nothing. And they fire off the questions about food, fricking, injuries in the past, anything at all that could result in abdominal pains. And one of them is trying to feel his gut, hits something and just turns pale. Says, this guy's got a huge cyst or something. It's hard as a rock, and it's inflamed. Better roll. So they throw him on the gurney, and out we go. I'm audio taping the whole conversation back to dispatch as we run down the hall. We load up and head. 2 minutes into the trip, the guy screams and jerks, then faints. One of the EMTs noticed a big dark wet spot on the guy's butt, so they start cutting away his trousers. We arrives just as they clear away enough to see he's bleeding anally. I go in with the team and start the prep work, but the bleeding is getting worse. So finally into surgery, where they removed a softball and a baseball from his Apparently, he lubed up, put the baseball in a condom, enjoyed it, so went bigger, and got the softball in, but then the cramps began. My mom's a paramedic and dinner conversations are usually interesting. She had one partner that just seemed to attract all the crazy calls. We'll call him Pat. Both of these happened while she was riding with him. They get a call for a woman in labor. Not quite full term, but close. When they get there she's already spread out saying she has to push. They never even had a chance to get her on a stretcher. Delivering babies isn't that unusual for paramedics, but this didn't go as planned. After 5 or so minutes of straining and groaning and pushing with my mom at her head and her partner on the business end, they had a successful delivery of an approximately 10-pound turd right into Pat's hands. Seems she'd been constipated for ages and not done anything about it. When the time finally came, she mistook the stomach cramps for labor. Another day, another call. They end up in the projects with an overweight woman complaining of chest pains. Usually when there's a chest pain call, the patient is not up and walking around and cussing at everyone thing in sight. This woman was doing all of the above, shirtless. She kept loudly repeating that her chest hurt while my mom and Pat asked her to let them take her vitals and to explain where the pain was. Eventually the woman had enough of them not understanding her and walked up to Pat. She screamed, "I said my chest hurts," picked up her huge saggy breasts and flopped them into Pat's hands. She wasn't having heart pains, she was having literal chest pains. Poor Pat. There's more, always, but those are my favorites of the funny calls. Getting an absolutely ridiculous run every now and then really helps them deal with some of the horrible things they face. Please, sir, I want some more. This occurred in a hospital, but in any case, my ex-girlfriend had a friend who was a nurse at a local hospital. One day, XGF suggests we go to the hospital to visit her friend, knowing that this particular hospital has absolutely stunning French fries available in their cafeteria for bargain basement prices. I agree. Upon arrival, we meet nurse friend, who looks a little upset. I purchase my delicious fries, we sit down, and XGF asks NF why she looks unhappy. NF relays the following story. A woman had recently needed surgery to remove her appendix. They had sewn her back up and sent her on her merry way. A few days later, she was back, complaining that her stitches had opened up. NF suggests to XGF and I that this is not unusual, given that the patient was overweight. Current French fry consumption ability above par. All systems go for increased cholesterol. The doctor had sewn her back up, and once again, the patient departed. The next day, she came back. Her stitches had opened up again. Odd, but still not unexplainable. NF suggests to the patient that she avoid any unnecessary activity. They sew her up again, and she leaves. Current French fry consumption ability average. Warily chewing while waiting for multiple shoes to drop. That day, prior to our arrival, this woman had come back in. Same issue. The stitches have pulled themselves out again, as this is the fourth time she has to be sewn up. The doctor says, look, you're doing something wrong here. What are you doing? Are you pulling these out on purpose? Patient gets super defensive. Doctor knows something is up. Patient starts to cry. They will not let her leave until she tells them what is happening. At this point, they bring in NF, who is pretty much a 22-year-old Mother Teresa. She is exactly the type of person whom I would want as a nurse. She can coax anything out of anyone. Ready for this? NF, 22MT, manages to get this patient to admit that it is not in fact her whom is pulling the stitches out, but her fiancé. This complete sociopath has convinced the patient to allow him to penetrate her, physically the hole in her belly where the doctor had removed her appendix. Apparently, this was not a painful event for the patient, even though some freaking nut was railing her in the guts. They made her promise not to have the stitches removed again prior to sending her out. Current French fry consumption ability. The plane has crashed into the mountain. We're done here. From what I gather, they did not have to restitch her again. TL. DR. Gutfriker. You don't get to talk anymore. You're done for the day. Holy goddamn crap. When I was an EMT, I responded to call where a hobo was hit by a train. He was scattered over the course of about 2 miles. I came across a shirt filled full of remains when I asked for a hand. The evil bastards I worked with gave me the guy's arm from the elbow down. My uncle was an EMT in a small redneck southern town. My favorite story is a man who got drunk and fell down the stairs of a bar, breaking his legs in the process. They had to cut his pants off to get to the injury, and when they took them off, they found a cucumber taped to the side of his thigh. I asked my uncle what he did about it, and he said they just left it there so when he sobered up, he'd find himself in a hospital bed with 2 legs in a cast and a cucumber rotting on his thigh. Similar story. My mom was a nurse at a hospital in the Chicagoland area. One day an old man came in because he had lost circulation to his leg. So they cut off his pants and they found a cucumber tied to his leg. Apparently he had been at a senior's ball and wanted to make himself appear more apt. Guy stuck at the top of a tree trying to rescue a kitten. Cats don't get stuck in trees, people do. The best part was the burly sanitation worker rubbing it in, asking him if he ever saw a kitten skeleton up in a tree. You see their skeleton under the tree where they fell after a week in a tree. I am not a cop. However, one of my good buddies works in the West Valley division of the LAPD. You know the movie Clueless? He patrols the area near where Alicia Silverstone gets robbed in the movie. In Idaho, him and his partner were driving around when they got a 5150 call, otherwise known as a crazy person on the loose. However, the person loose so much as it was their bowels. A 50-year-old man was sitting on a ledge and crapping over the other side. His pants were nowhere to be found. So my buddy and his partner get there and they approach the man. It smells freaking terrible. but they still begin to talk to the man. The man seemed to be a bit hungover. He had been probably drinking during the day and got dehydrated. He tried to explain to them who he was, but nothing was coherent. My buddy and his partner didn't know what to do. They didn't really have the means to transport a man with crap running down his legs. My buddy's partner had a good idea. They approached the man. "Sir, how are you feeling?" "Wah. My head hurts." "You hear that? His head hurts. Call 911. My buddy looked astonished. He radioed for an ambulance, and one had arrived in a couple short minutes. The cop explained to the paramedics that the man was severely dehydrated, which caused his bowels to evacuate, not that he was just super hungover. So that is how my buddy and his partner got out of schlepping a crazy man covered in poo back to the station. D. Good call. This deserves more. My former art teacher used to work in the forest service and would tell us stories about funny weird crap that happened. I still doubt the validity of this, but he had no reason to lie and swears by it. There were firemen out in the middle of nowhere basically fighting a forest fire, Arizona, or brush fire. There wasn't any real danger to people because of how remote this location was. Whether this happened on break or away from the fire he didn't specify, or I have forgotten. But off in the distance they saw a figure, a brightly colored figure walking calmly. As they squinted and started to pursue the figure, they realized there was a fully dressed and face-painted clown out in the middle of nowhere, no campgrounds, no houses for miles, and he had nothing on him, at least visible. Big bag for basic survival. He was just calmly walking alone in the middle of the forest. While they started to get closer but still fighting through the brush, the clown saw he was being followed and evaded them, and was never seen again. No one had heard anything or just kept it as a secret. TLDR. Former Forest Service worker and fireman saw a random clown strolling through the middle of a remote forest near a fire. He probably freaking lit it. I had a patient one time drink a whole gallon of Tide laundry detergent in an effort to kill Satan's baby that I've been pregnant with for 2 years. I was able to keep my composure the whole time we were taking her to the hospital, but every time she started talking, you'd see bubbles in her mouth. I held my composure through that, but then she vomited, and that's when I lost it. It was seriously like a kid's toy. Bubbles everywhere. The ambulance didn't even smell like vomit. It smelled like Tide Springtime Fresh. I have never really laughed at people in the back of the ambulance. Maybe a light chuckle here or there, but this time I couldn't help it. I full on belly laughed about a third of the way to the hospital. She survived and I've taken her in on various psych issues since then, but she will always be Tide Springtime Fresh to me. I wanted to stop reading this thread, but I felt like I needed to conclude with something that wasn't completely horrific. I would like to thank you for supplying. When I was on the FD, we had a call for a power line down at a cell tower up on a hill in the middle of nowhere. This was during a bad storm. Power company trucks were all tied up already when we got turned out. We get there and the power line for the cell tower is lying in the road. There is a number on the shack at the bottom of the antenna, so we call the number while trying to get a hold of someone from the cell tower, which is running on a generator and possibly still energizing the line that is laying the street. We realize the door to the shack is unlocked, so we're all standing inside it out of the rain. The assistant chief is on his phone talking to some guy about the antenna, and all of a sudden he goes pale white, like a ghost, then walks out the door into the rain and tells us all to get out. Turns out the guy on the phone had told him that whatever happens, don't go in the shack because it is infested with brown recluse spiders that are attracted by the warmth. Everyone was crapping bricks when they heard that. Sorry if I rambled. I'm well into a nice bottle of rye. Oh, there was a time in the winter when we were looking for body parts in a field after a bad accident. Trudging around in knee-deep snow, this old timer steps on something round and hard and crunches it. He almost fainted. He thought he had stepped on someone's head. Turns out the field was an old pumpkin patch and it was a frozen pumpkin. My uncle was an EMT and fire captain for a while. He does some different training type stuff now, which means he doesn't go out on calls much anymore. Anyway, his weirdest story was about 2 guys who got killed by a farmer. His firehouse was on the border of a suburban farming community, so with there being a lot of land, people would go ride dirt bikes and motocross bikes. These two guys like to jump some dirt piles or what have you on this one farmer property and he didn't like it. He tried to get them to stop in various way but finally he had enough of it. He one day put up in a clearing open pathway a thing of high test fishing line or something like that between two trees. One of the guys on a motorcycle came through at head level and didn't get his head taken off, but the line seriously cut into his neck and he ultimately bled out and died. My uncle was the one who was called to the scene to try and save him but he was pretty much dead when he got there. He says that call has always sort of bugged him because it was a younger kid, 20 something, and it was such a cruel way for the farmer to deal with his problem. My mom's cousin was riding a dirt bike through the woods one day and hit a barbed wire at neck level that decapitated him. I get told that story every time I even think of buying a bike. Went out on a wreck where these two out-of-state kids overcorrected, veered off the road, hit a dirt hill, and landed in a tree. Neither of them were seriously injured but it sure was a sight to see a brand new Tundra stuck in a tree about 6 feet off the ground. For our friends outside the USA, 6 feet, 1.8 m. Yeehaw. A guy had accidentally hung himself in his garage. He literally had a contraption he had built that held him in a harness. One of his arms controlled a rope that was attached through a pulley system with corn cobber at the end. As he pulled the rope the dildo did the job on his backside. The other arm controlled the same kind of pulley but at the end was a noose that was tied around his neck. Needless to say he pulled a little too tight on the noose end. It was a nice normal neighborhood and the guy was married with kids with a seemingly completely normal life. If autoerotic asphyxiation is wrong, I don't want to be. Old, Zlkzik7 Zito JNMV. I came to an unconscious unresponsive young male in a bathroom W massive bleeding. Turns out he was getting frisky W a plunger and his feet slipped out underneath him and it just ripped his hollow and solid organs apart. He was obviously DOA. Another was an old lady whom hadn't been seen outside her apartment for quite some time and wasn't answering the door. We knew she had died as we could smell her from outside. The fire department knocked down her door. I told the firefighter to go in and he was like no way, it would be an emergency, fully knowing that she was almost 100% dead. Lights were all turned off and it was 2 AM so each room I had to flip the switch. There were bloody paw prints all over the place and in the bathroom, the toilet seat had been flipped up and there were bloody paw prints all around it as well. When I flipped the bathroom light I was pretty sure what I would see but it was worse than I had expected. The cats had started to eat her after she had died. I was 19 at that time. It seems I have scrolled too far down the comments TT. We responded to a call where a mid-50 something year old semi-frail looking male bit his early 20-year-old something son, who probably outweighed the father by about 150 pounds or so, about 25 times all over his body, everywhere, arms, neck, torso, legs. It was ridiculous. They were deep marks too, like he was trying to rip skin away. Apparently they got into an altercation over who knows what and the wife mother had to break it up by threatening them both with a large kitchen knife which the police confiscated. But the kicker was, there were no drugs or alcohol involved. Another was when we responded to a child who fell and hit his head on a tire that was sitting in their yard. Why it was there, I have no clue. But anyways, I went to check his pupils when I noticed one was completely fricked up. It looked almost like a tiny cat's eye. I almost flipped an absolute crap because this kid seemed perfectly fine, vitals good, talking to us properly, but the size of his pupil when compared to the other indicated moderate to severe head trauma, plus the whole abnormal pupil shape which I've never seen before. Well, after I flipped a crap to myself, I asked the mother. It turns out he was stabbed in the eye by his sister with a pencil when he was younger. This, my friend, is why you must always get a good patient history. My mother, who was a case manager for a while, had two interesting stories. A homeless woman who was a paranoid schizophrenic came into my mother's office with a severe infection in her foot. When my mother asks her if she thinks she's ready to be discharged, she proceeds to tell my mom that she did not have an infection in her foot but that she was turning into a pterodactyl. And the other is that another man who had schizophrenia explained to my mother that the voices in his head told him to cut off his dong and feed it to his dog. And he did. Okay, I'm an EMT. One of my teachers told me once about the craziest call he's ever received. He's sitting at the station and he gets a call for a lacerated finger. They arrive at the house and sure enough, a woman is sitting at the table with an extremely bloody finger. They patch up the wound and head out the door, and before they get on the truck, the woman taps him on the shoulder and says, "That's not really why I called you," and he says, "Well, what's the issue, Mom?" And she responded with, "I crap you not, I have razor blades in my tea." Apparently this woman had a sleeping disorder, in which she would sleepwalk and put crap in her tea and butt. Well, I suppose that's a fairly decent contraceptive. I'm a volunteer EMT. A chubby lady in her 30s made a 911 for severe abdominal pain. It's 2 in the morning, so I just woke up, tired and drowsy. As my partner and I get to her house, the husband is there at the door and tells us it's no big deal. We walk inside and find the woman laying on the floor on newspapers surrounded by cats. Must have been 4 or 5 cats laying next to her, licking her tea. Yes, the woman was giving birth. She did not know she was pregnant. We saw the little baby being delivered next to cats. Even worse, they had their 4-year-old boy stand next to her as he watched his mother give birth in pain. The little boy was crying. The cats were still licking her. The husband was standing there like it was no big deal. We had to call our county back and update them about the situation. They sent paramedics to assist. The cops showed up before we even got there. Told us it was ugly. They were right. When I was still doing clinicals for my EMTB cert, I had a ride along with a company that serviced rural areas. The first call we went to was a woman with chest pains. We pulled up to a house that looked like it was made with toothpicks and styrofoam. It was a dilapidated shanty in the middle of the woods. Cue the drop of my stomach knowing this is going to be a weird one. We walk in and the floor is dirt, not covered in dirt, actual dirt. There was a burn barrel in the corner, no electricity, and a dingy mattress on the floor covered in tattered blankets. The PT looked rather weary while I was checking her vitals and I could see the shame in her eyes. We put her in the back of the truck for transport. I gave her some nitro and tried to talk with her a bit. It was a really sad and strange thing, and it still sticks out in my mind 7 years later. Of course, we had a looped out drug user later in the day that was weird too, but only because I've never seen someone enjoy drinking activated charcoal that much. We were dispatched to an elderly couple's residence, with a woman calling in to report that her husband had fallen in the shower. Groans from myself and my partner as we bantered about who would have to deal with the soggy old man parts should anything be wrong down there. We reach the residence and are led upstairs to the shower, where we find a perfectly alert older man sitting down on one of those handicapped fold-out shower seats. The shortened conversation goes like this. "Hello sir, I'm John and this is Smith. We're paramedics and are here to help. How about we give you a hand and help you stand up?" "I can't stand up." "Yeah, we know. That's why your wife called. If you let us take your arms, we can help lift you up." "No son, you don't understand. I can't stand up. Take a look at the seat and you'll see what I mean." The construction of this particular shower seat was several wooden slats arranged horizontally, with the attachment points of hinges that could swivel just slightly. When the poor guy fell backwards in the shower, he plopped down with such force that the slats opened side to side, allowing just enough space for his nutsack to squeak through, after which the slats promptly snapped back into place, firmly binding him to the chair. We tried to open the slats again, but that only succeeded in applying pressure on things which obviously did not want to be pulled on at that moment. Eventually we called for an engine company, who extricated the poor guy by cutting off the entire seat, which is how he was transported. Never did get to find out how things ended up for him. Firefighters of Reddit. What's the dumbest way you've seen someone accidentally start a house fire? In the city of Colorado Springs, the local news did a fluff piece about candle safety near Christmas. After they were done filming, the store owner that they were filming in took the crew out to breakfast. She didn't put out the candles and burned several shops to the ground. The film crew was there to film her breakdown when they realized what caused the fire. Whoa, that's a textbook example of irony. I worked for a restoration company. A family cut a small tree down and tried to stuff it up their fireplace to burn. The flute was so crammed with leaves that smoke started to fill the living room. They tried to pull the tree out and that's when it really caught fire. They tried to pull it out of the house, They got as far as the front door. All of them had 2 third-degree burns on their hands, arms, and a fire destroyed the front room and entryway of their house. The insurance company asked us if we thought it was a case of fraud, and we told them no, these people are just really stupid. That is the stupidest thing I've read all day, and I spent an hour in an AskReddit thread about the stupidest demands IT workers have gotten earlier. A Roomba knocked a scented candle over and set fire to the rest of the room. The guy said he knew the Roomba did it because he watched the whole thing happen, but didn't do anything because he thought it was funny. I can just imagine the Roomba turning to face the guy and saying something like, "They'll never believe you." Teenager was charcoal grilling in the attached garage during the winter. When done, he decided the best place to dispose of the hot coals was into a cardboard box in front corner of the garage closest to the house. Yeah, it went about as well as you can imagine. He forgot to turn the coals off. A fairly common one, but the response was interesting. Early February, Western PA. Guy's pipes freeze on the coldest day of the year, -8 F. He tries to thaw them with a propane torch, sets the wall on fire, tries to put the fire out, fails. Finally calls 911. Fire chief is 1/2 block away, is on scene in under a minute. Basement is fully involved, main floor catching. First engine arrives in under 5 minutes. Doors are blocked by fire. Exterior attack only. I'm on an attack line, spraying water into the second floor window. After 40 minutes, another firefighter comes to relieve me, but since I'd been getting back spray, I'm frozen to the ground. He has to pull me loose. 2 hours later, we have it knocked down. The insurance adjuster shows up. Assistant chief explains what started the fire. Adjuster replies, "Oh, yeah, we know. It's okay. We insure for stupid. Nobody got hurt. Family gets a much nicer house out of the deal." My dad was a firefighter, and he once went to a house fire that was started by the old lady who lived there. She liked to burn candles, but didn't like the wax buildup that would form in the cavity, so she would soak up the liquid wax with a napkin. She was doing this when she accidentally brushed a wax-soaked napkin up against the flame. She panicked and threw the napkin into the trash, where all the other wax napkins were. As the trash can exploded into flames, she fled the house, but not before she went to her oxygen tanks and flooded the house with pure oxygen, because she thought that it would smother the fire. The exact worst thing to possibly do. I'm guessing they were not able to save the house after that move. Not a house fire, but really good. Late 1980s. Guy was driving an old, beat-up Lincoln. He turned a corner to go up a steep hill, but the road department had recently ground the asphalt down in preparation to repave. A storm sewer manhole cover was sticking up about 4 inches. As he went over it and up the hill, the rear of his car dragged due to the pavement height difference, and the manhole ripped open his fuel tank and sparked off the gas. Guy described it. "I heard a scraping sound, looked in the mirror, and there was this trail of fire chasing me up the hill, like I was the roadrunner." He pulled into a gravel parking lot and tried to kick a brake in the trail before the fire got there, but it jumped the gap and lit the car. By the time we got there, it was a total loss. He actually thought it was kind of funny. The only real loss was his wife's purse, with her license and credit cards. The car was insured, and they got a pretty nice payout for it. Yeah, that is a good one. I can imagine watching that all go down, lol. I'm glad everything was okay in the end. This happened this past fall, but a family had a fairy house that was outside, right next to their Woodside's house. The fairy house was made out of an old tree, and had a bunch of decorations in it, including incense candles. One evening, they decided that they would light the candles for the fairies, which then caught the tree on fire, which then extended into the house. Since it started on the outside, it ran up the side of the house and got into the attic and second floor. The family was home, but in the first floor while this was happening. It wasn't until someone driving on the road saw the smoke and went to alert the family. Luckily, we were able to save the structure. There was a bit of damage to the roof, attic and second floor, but the homeowners are rebuilding those areas. Fairies were displeased, I guess. In college, a girl in the dorms was making popcorn which, not sure how but somehow, caught fire in the microwave. She didn't want to get into trouble for it, so she grabbed the flaming bag of popcorn and threw it into the nearby trash can. Then proceeded to cover the fire with paper towels to smother it. She actually thought it would work. It did not work. I came back exhausted after work to find the dorm building surrounded by fire trucks. College students are really something else. My school is a nursing and engineering school, full of the people that will be staffing hospitals and designing the technology of tomorrow. I cannot tell you how many times I was awoken in the middle of the night because one of these beacons of the future got stoned and put a burrito in the microwave with the foil still on it. Based on the stories from relatives, the answer is by allowing 10 years worth of dry lint to accumulate inside the machine until it just bursts into flames. It was not an isolated case. Was in my local paper. Turned out to be my friend's older brother. He tried to smoke out bees in the loft and set fire to the insulation in the loft and burned the whole house down. Dusts off hands well. We ain't gotta worry about bees no more. My father was a Boston firefighter for 30+ years. One of his more memorable stories was a foreign family who had ripped up their cast iron bathtub and built an open flame underneath the tub. They used the tub as a giant oil fryer. Naturally, this didn't work out very well and the house caught fire. To add to the insanity even more, the family absolutely refused to let my dad and his co-workers in without taking their boots off, which of course, they couldn't agree to. Just crazy. I was a chef before I was on a volunteer fire department for a bit, and this was at a restaurant down the street from my old one. Cooks at this restaurant forgot to plug the drain in the deep fryer. So what happened was they put oil in a fryer, which drained immediately, right before lunch, turned on the empty fryer, and that's when the coils caught fire. So not only did they spill 5 gallons of oil, burn a fryer, fill a restaurant with smoke and kill the service day, this was the second time it happened. My uncle is a firefighter. The answer is Christmas trees. They dry out, they become a ticking time bomb. He used to do an annual demonstration where he'd let a Christmas tree dry out for a few months, then take it outside and ignite it. The flames would shoot 40 feet in the air and the tree would be gone in a few seconds. It was mightily impressive to behold, and I'm sticking with artificial trees. Firefighter here. One extremely cold night, the temperature was -11, wind chills 40s. This guy tries starting a fire in his fireplace and couldn't get it started. He decides to use gasoline, dumps 1/2 gallon on the firewood stacked by the door and the other 1/2 onto the wood in the fireplace. As he attempted to light the fire, he couldn't get the lighter to work. Now the vapors are really starting to build. He then goes to the kitchen, which adjoins the room with the fireplace, to use the stove to light some newspaper. As soon as he turned the knob on the stove, the igniter lit the gasoline vapors. The living room was instantly on fire. The vapors singed all his hair and got first-degree burns on his hands and face. We on the other hand spent the next few hours in the extreme cold. Flash ahead 3 hours, the firewood outside has somehow ignited and we have to go back. The second fire had some time to really grow. Middle of the night, everyone in bed, no one around. Longest coldest night of my life, all because some fool decided to use gasoline to start a fire indoors. General rule is to never bring gasoline inside, even just because of the fumes. Not a firefighter, but I set my parents' bathroom on fire while getting up from the toilet. My mom used to leave potpourri simmering in a small bowl on the back of the toilet with a candle to heat stew it just below. As I was getting up, I somehow knocked the apparatus off the back of the commode. We had carpet floors in that bathroom and that section of the floor caught pretty quickly. The fire then found a seam in the wallpaper and ignited the glue fairly easily as well. As the flames rose, it caught the roll of toilet paper on the way up the wall, which really accelerated things. All this took 30 seconds, and I remember being somewhat mesmerized at the path the flames traveled. I also remember that I had flushed the toilet before realizing what had happened. I somehow thought to grab the toilet bowl brush, shove it into the commode to get it wet, and then beat out the flames. The aftermath was surprisingly minimal. The small section of carpet was destroyed, but my parents replaced the carpet everywhere a few years later. The wallpaper wiped clean with some hot water and a rag, and thankfully there was only a little permanent smoke damaged on the ceiling, which has seemed to fade over time. Mid-80s, near beginning of my career, Young lady finished putting flea spray on her pupper when she noticed a tick embedded in its flank. Ever hear of the tick removal technique in which you blow out a match and touch the hot tip to the tick, thereby causing it to back out of the dog? Yep, dog caught on fire. Little fellow ran under the bed, which also caught fire. Lady grabbed the pup with spray wet hands, and they too caught on fire. Long story short, the house was a mess, but both the lady and the dog fortunately survived with moderate burns. There was also the lady who tried to sanitize her panties in the microwave, but I was off that day. This might be the best one. Family friend decided to make major renovations on their home with no background in construction carpentry. They also didn't bring a professional to ensure that their renovations were up to fire code. Lo and behold, an exposed wire sparked a fire in the middle of the night and burned down their entire home. They have 3 kids and are very fortunate they all were able to escape the fire without any injuries. To make matters even worse, they had no house insurance. Extreme libertarians that don't believe in insurance debt, so they ended up having to rely on a GoFundMe fundraiser set up by a relative to recover financially. Last I heard, they were still living in a hotel trying to figure out their next plan of action. This story alone reaffirms my belief that some things are better left to the professionals. Even if you're trying to cut costs, it might be best to pay a little extra to have someone with experience do something for you instead. This avoids terrible situations like this. Libertarians relying on a GoFundMe. That's amazing. Not a firefighter, but happened in my building. In India generally you have small praying place in your house, like a little version of a temple. You lit diya lamp every day and pray there. In this particular case the family decided to keep this thing on a Fukin refrigerator. The diya fell behind the fridge due to wind from the window adjacent to it. The condenser caught fire and literally exploded. The whole floor was on fire. Luckily no one was home. It really was a dumb decision to keep a temple on a Fukin fridge. Not a firefighter, and it wasn't in a house but on a certain mall here in Monterrey, Mexico. We have a freaky plaza, a little mall where all the geeks, gamers and otakus go to, and on the second floor someone was smoking while playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Since he didn't wanted to throw his ashes on the floor and the trash can was too far away from him, he decided to make a paper ashtray. Yeah, that didn't work out well, especially when 3 of his friends decided to use it too. Should have used a pot of green instead. So, here in Argentina we have El Cordero a la Cruz, aka cooking a whole lamb with open fire. Well, it just so happens that pines are really flammable, and if you make an unprotected fire in a floor covered in pine leaves near a blooming pine. Once my neighbor stole 15 propane tanks and decided to make a DIY blowtorch. By neighbor I mean he lived below us. We were giving him our basement. He almost lit the house on fire, but then he tripped on something and fell over. The next morning we looked and saw it had burned a little bit but not much. He was also very drunk that day. Once we lived in a basement suite and the people who lived above us were making toast at 2 AM and they used a fork to get it out, but the fork hit something so the toaster caught fire and my mom tried to wake me up, but I just pulled my blanket over my head and said I just want to sleep a little more, and then my mom said the house could burn down and I was the first one out of my house. My neighbors forgot they had ferrets inside. We grabbed our dog but they didn't grab their ferrets. The fire department came, but my neighbors could have put out the fire if they unplugged the toaster and putting baking soda on it. No, the poor little ferrets. Someone tried to make a gummy bear lamp like an Icoli to test it really gonna burn. And then his house was on fire. That episode scarred me for life. Every time I use fire my mind goes there. Not a firefighter, but the apt building I stayed in had a pretty good fire. Guy threw a lit cigarette in a coffee can full of butts. It was on the far end of the building from us, so my upstairs neighbor and I got to stay. Everyone else had to move. We were dealing with water leaks for almost a year after that. It took them that long to sort out insurance stuff and make repairs. Finally put on a new roof a few weeks before we moved. I hate people that do this. I work in a grocery store and every couple of weeks in the summer, I have to play amateur firefighter because some idiot thought that throwing a lit cigarette into our outdoor ashtray was a good idea. News article I read, one guy had a fish bowl in his garden shed. Sunlight was focused through the bowl, through his kitchen window. Fwoomph. I've never before thought to try to spell out that sound, and I think you did a really good job. My partner's a firefighter. He said the dumbest one was where a man tried to barbecue in his basement. His reasoning? I don't want to go outside and risk exposure to coronavirus. It would be safer to do it here in the basement. I have been a firefighter for 20 years. The dumbest way I've seen a house fire start was when people squatting in a basement decided that a space heater would be handy in drying their clothes. Then they waited 15 minutes before calling for us, trying to put out with a garden hose into the basement on a 5-degree night. They burned down their home and the one next door. There was a show in the UK called 999 Lifesavers. There was one episode where some kids were dicking around with an old oil barrel. One tipped oil over himself, so he went to dry himself by their campfire they'd started, and wait, what? My neighbors recently burned their house down emptying an ashtray before they went to bed. They have since quit smoking. Not a firefighter, but this was a very dumb fire. I'm a teacher. One day, in my department's office, someone noticed a smell. They got the rest of us to stand up and go to where they were standing. It smelled like burning plastic to me, so I tried to find the source. All of the science lab cabinets were nearby, so I carefully felt each for heat and then unlocked and very slowly opened the doors to check that the problem wasn't there. No lab chemical problems. We finally narrow it down to a spot behind the wall, and that's when I realize electrical fires smell like burning plastic. I call our head custodian right away. He doesn't answer, so I call the principal and interrupt his meeting. He tells me he'll get the custodian down there. They come. I say we should call the fire department and get them to check it out ASAP. School decides this is not necessary. Principal tells off science department for not being careful with their chemicals. What? This is Wednesday. Thursday, smell had faded but then suddenly increases and is worse midday. I call the principal immediately and say, there's an electrical fire. Call the fire department. After about a half hour of deliberation, they decide to call an electrician. He stares at the wall, says he doesn't smell anything, then leaves. Friday. On Fridays, I didn't have a morning class, and on that particular day, I decided to take my time and go in late. I get to the school around 10 AM. About 8 fire trucks there and the whole school evacuated. A teacher runs up to me. Real fire, I ask. Yep, in 2 rooms and we had to evacuate. Let me guess. Room 208 and 210? How'd you know? TL. DR. Smelled an electrical fire for 2 days, but my bosses decided not to call the fire department until the school was actually on fire. Your principal's a fucking dumbass. My father lived in a rented apartment. The landlord lived in the apartment beneath him. My father had switched the fuse off the oven off because he had done some electrical work. He also put some receipts on the oven. In the meantime, the landlord saw the flipped off fuse, located on the basement, and flipped it on. We wondered why it smelled burned, and we discovered that the oven was on and had burned the paper to ash. Amazing. It did not really burn. The paper just turned to ash. You could even still read some words, but if you touched it, it just turned to dust. I'm guessing the oven was set to something lower than 451 Fahrenheit. Not a firefighter, but I was living in a big old single family home that had been converted into 6 apartments. Because it was a house, it had a shingle roof. The owner hired one of those unlicensed, uninsured type outfits to work on the roof. The kind you find hanging out at Home Depot in the morning looking for jobs. Anyways, long story short, the guy was on the roof, smoking, and somehow caught it on fire. Rather than dialing 911, he ran down 3 flights of fire escape, got the garden hose, and ran it back up. Once he got to the top, he realized he never turned it on, so he ran back down, turned it on, and ran back up. Apparently by that time it was out of control, so he headed off. One of the neighbors finally called 911, but by then it was a full-on blaze. Destroyed the top 2 floors and most of the first floor. Moral of the story is, just call the professionals. Probably too late for this to get traction, but by far the dumbest is people smoking while on medical oxygen. Like the tanks are coated in labels about how flammable it is. My dad said that one time there was a small fire because a homeless man tried to use a microwave that he installed himself underneath the pier, and it exploded. Apparently it worked the first few times he used it though. Two kids playing in their backyard and decided to light the shed on fire, then it spread to their 2 cars and their house, all burnt down. A firefighter started a fire at his ex's house to win her back by saving her, claiming he was just driving by and saw it. Kid lit curtain on fire on 2nd floor. Apartment building almost caught fire because someone decided they could grill on the 2nd floor of an apartment building right next to the siding. More kids being dumb and lighting their houses on fire somehow. At the time my dad was assistant chief of the volunteer fire department, eventually moved up to chief. Before you scoff, they were actually very well funded and had some amazing equipment. Thanks to a local glass fiber optics corporation. My mother started a fire in the dryer from not cleaning out the lint trap. It was a minor fire, but a fire at the assistant chief's house. First responders for miles showed up. Cops, EMTs, firefighters, and they gave my dad crap for years about it. It was even mentioned at his funeral service. Good times. A guy had a bunch of ants coming through his wall. He started burning them with a butane torch and it ended really badly. He thought it'd be okay because the exterior wall was concrete. Yes, some people are that stupid. Most of the fires I've seen have been started by the usual stupid. Unattended candles, smoking in bed, smoking on drugs and passing out, unattended kitchens, etc. The weirdest one I've been to was a porch fire caused by sunlight refracting through a glass hummingbird feeder. The ones we can never get to on time are kitchen grease fires doused with water. Those people are lucky to get out of the house at all. Not a firefighter, but our next door neighbors built a brand new house and moved in. The last item to finish was stain the deck. After the painters were done with the first day, they took all the stained rags, stuffed them into a plastic bag and left them next to the house. Sometime after midnight the rags self-combusted, caught fire and burnt the house down. I'm not a firefighter, and technically it didn't start a house fire, but an ex-friend. Hopefully you understand why it's an ex-friend after reading this. Once wanted to find out what happened if you put paper into a fryer full of oil. I don't know why. Both why he wanted to and why I was friends with him, but he wouldn't listen. He waited for it to heat up, dropped a few drops of water in to make it spit like an angry dragon. Then when he was satisfied it was hot enough to melt the paper, he dipped in a sheet of A4. It caught fire, obviously. If I wasn't there it would have ended so badly, but luckily I knew what to do. Grabbed a towel, ran it under the water and then suffocated the flames. He wanted to throw his drink on it, and it was right then that I knew I should not spend another minute with this guy. Scorch marks up the wall, smoke filled the apartment, and I just walked out. That was the last time we spoke, almost 15 years ago. My junior year of college my roommate almost started our house on fire by smoking weed, dumping the ashes in an empty can, throwing it in a paper grocery bag he used as garbage bag next to his bed, then promptly leaving the house. Thank God I was home and started smelling smoke, getting stronger. I searched the whole house trying to figure out where it was coming from. Every room except his room at first because his door was closed. Called 911. And while I was on the phone with them, I opened his bedroom door and it was entirely filled with smoke but no visible flame. Searched the room while holding my breath and eyes burning from smoke and found the smoldering paper bag. I took it out to the front porch and sprayed with a garden hose to extinguish. Lucky I was home and I caught it when I did, because if his bed caught the whole house would have gone up. No real damage done. Fire depth still came, sirens blaring, and a cop, to whom I stupidly admitted my roommate was smoking pot. What happened here? Me. My roommate was smoking and threw the ashes in a paper garbage bag. Him. Smoking cigarettes. Me. Silence. Him. Pot. Me. Silent head nod. He just threw his hands in the air disgusted at the stupidity and left. Worst part was I was living in a house handed down in my family for decades. A family member of mine was listening to the fire scanner for fun, heard the address on the radio, and called the rest of my family saying there was a fire. Got a whole bunch of panicked phone calls. Oh, and my live-in girlfriend's parents were visiting the house that morning too. They weren't super excited about it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.